Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Guest interviews include entrepreneurs, CEOs, and politicos who are experts in their fields. Be sure to listen up. This is important because it's your money. Your money. Be sure to listen to Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie. Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on 98.7 The Coast.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your host, Melanie Collette, broadcasting live in beautiful Wildwood, New Jersey, here on 98.7 The Coast. My guests this evening are Portia Wood, Esquire. She is an estate planning lawyer from Wood Legal Group. We're going to talk to her this evening about the importance of estate planning and closing the racial wealth gap. Is there a racial wealth gap? We're going to talk to her about that this evening. And we also have with us in the second hour, Dana Golden from the Life Recovery Coach. We're going to talk to her about the stigma of addiction in the workplace. Very interesting topic that we're going to discuss. There are people who have drug addictions and who are being treated or who have drug problems, and the stigma that comes along with that in the workplace. A very interesting topic as well. So looking forward to both of those conversations this evening. Very strangely and unusually, I did not do any media this week, but today is Cinco de Mayo. So strangely, it's strange to say Happy Cinco de Mayo in light of what I learned about Cinco de Mayo today. Now, if you are a nerd like myself, you may also have a subscription to Dictionary.com. If you do, you know that Dictionary.com will send you a word of the day. And that way you can learn new words and expand your vocabulary, which is very exciting for nerds like myself. So when I get my word of the day, I receive the word, you get the word in the definition, and you get the pronunciation. It's very cool. And so I try to learn my word of the day every day. But today, Dictionary.com did something special for Cinco de Mayo and sent an article about Cinco de Mayo and what Cinco de Mayo is, and it explained why it's a little problematic to be, especially us as Americans, the way we celebrate Cinco de Mayo is a bit problematic. And it's on the website, Dictionary.com, if you want to check it out. But long story short, Cinco de Mayo is a celebration of the Mexican victory over French forces on May 5th, 1862. That's the short version of what the celebration of Cinco de Mayo is. It's a little bit, I guess, equivalent to, one of the United States celebration of one of our mini wars that we were victorious over. So it's kind of like weird for us to be like, let's get tacos and put a sombrero on and drink heavily. Because that's what we do. And I would guarantee that the vast majority of us, like myself, did not know what the celebration of Cinco de Mayo is. Hence, my nerd-like tendency and thirst for information as an academic, and my subscription to Dictionary.com, as well as many other nerdy websites that I subscribe to because I like to know stuff. So they have an entire article on their website today. So if you're celebrating Cinco de Mayo this evening, you might want to pop on to Dictionary.com and see what you're celebrating right now, so that you can just feel a little better about that beer that you're drinking or whatever right now, or that taco that you're munching on, or that sombrero that you're wearing, or at least, when you're saying Happy Cinco de Mayo to your Mexican friend, you actually know what you're talking about. Just saying. Now, let's go to a bit of money news what's going on in the money market. U.S. mortgage rates jumped again from 5.1 to 5.27. And it's the highest rate since 2009. Everything is going up, and it's crazy. The higher borrowing costs are pushing buyers out of the market. And it's the housing market is really nuts right now. Just everything is going up. And according to Freddie Mac economists, they're expecting home price gains to slow soon. And that's problematic. That's scary. And as a matter of fact, it also means higher prices when it comes to buying a car. In fact, the average monthly payment for a new car, $650, because of the higher interest rates for loans. That is nuts. The new car prices are up 12.5% year over year, and that's according to the most recent data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The average price of used cars is up 35.3 from a year ago. 35.3% from a year ago. I can tell you, I paid my car off a couple of years ago, and the dealer where I bought my car emails me, I swear, every week and says, "When can we buy your car? When can we buy your car?" And I'm like, never, because it's paid off. But here lately, I'm like, I guess I should know just in case something happens. I guess I should have an idea of what I want to buy. So I've been kind of perusing the websites just to see what I might like, what I might want to get. First of all, I see nothing that I like as much as the car that I have, even though it's old and banged up because apparently I think curbs are a suggestion. But I digress. But they're so expensive. Just very, very expensive. Crazy. The other thing that's going on is that's good but bad, right? The economy added 400,000 new jobs in April. Great, right? But the U.S. is running out of labor. We're literally running out of people to work jobs. There's a couple of reasons for this. People are not going back to work. People are quitting. I really think that the pandemic had a somewhat spiritual effect on people. Like, people had to stay home from their jobs, had to work from home. And when they got away from some toxic environments, they realized that it really wasn't worth it. The toxic environment, the toxic boss, whatever it was that they were dealing with in their office or in their environment, and they just quit or retired early. Like, people are retired early in droves. People are hiring, and people are not going back. It's crazy what's going on. It says, this is according to an article by Market Watch. It says that a hiring gain that matches Wall Street's forecast would leave the U.S. just 1.2 million jobs below its pre-coronavirus peak at 152.5 million. The economy is on track to soon recover all 22 million jobs lost in its first month of the pandemic, based on a survey of business establishments. But hiring is all but certain to slow. That is crazy, because people are just not going back to work. If people can retire, they're retiring. And I've heard this from several people. The unemployment rate is only at 3%, because people are just like, forget it, not going back to work. Life is short. Not doing it. And I don't blame people. And I think that people are just really have become more spiritual and more reflective about what they want to do with their lives. And they're like, I think I don't want to spend 10 hours a day doing something that sucks. I think that I'm not going to do that. I think I'm going to actually try to do something that I enjoy instead. So how about no? How about no? And I go do something that I enjoy. I think that people probably maximized some of that time that they had off and got a different kind of training to do something new. Again, many people retired early. I know in the field of academia, a lot of teachers. There's a whole section of TikTok that's just teachers quitting. Just teachers quitting. That's it. And different jobs that they've done quitting. And just teachers encouraging other teachers to quit in what they're doing now. Jobs in corporate. Jobs and just doing other stuff. It's wild. The market is wild. And here's the thing. While people are making more money, wages are going up. Unfortunately, it's not keeping up with inflation. That's the problem. Inflation's up to like 8.5%. Wages are up like 5%. So we're in the negative by 3%. And that's unfortunate. You know, we're still behind as far as wages are concerned. But it makes the job market super competitive. You know, when people have all of these openings, which on a local level, you know, I always say at the beginning of the show that I'm broadcasting live from beautiful Wildwood, New Jersey, which it is beautiful. It's a beautiful resort area, and there's surrounding islands. That's a resort area. And this is a really hot time for hiring because it's a resort area. It's warm. There's hotels and beaches and restaurants. And you know, everybody's starting, most places are starting at like $17, $18 an hour for like front desk positions and food and beverage and all kinds of stuff. But there are some people who are paying $14 an hour, $13 an hour. And I'm thinking, who's going to work for that? Nobody around here is going to work for that. Not anymore. And I'm just wondering how those places are going to get anyone to work for them in this market. I just don't, I don't see it on a local level. But so if you're looking for a job, I say think about what you really want to do. It's a competitive market and there's tons of training out here. Think about what you really want to do and don't settle. Anyway, you're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your host, Melanie Collette. Our first guest is Portia Wood of Wood Legal Group. We're going to talk about estate planning and closing the racial wealth gap. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. Our first guest this evening is Portia Wood. She is an estate planning lawyer of Wood Legal Group. She is a generational wealth planning attorney based in Los Angeles. Portia leads the Wood Legal Group, an African-American woman-owned and operated mother-daughter law firm specializing in estate planning, probate, and elder law. She and her mother and law partner, Robin Wood, are passionately focused on helping all families grow and protect wealth. Learn more at woodlegalgroup.com. Welcome to the show, Portia.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you this evening. How are you?
I am doing well. I've been listening to your show, and you're phenomenal. And I'm so grateful to be able to be here and share with you.
That is very kind of you to say. I appreciate it. I'm excited to have you on the show. I suspect that we have very different ideologies, which is why I'm excited to have you on the show. Actually,
okay, cool.
But
okay.
I think we agree on this topic probably, though. So
I think that's probably true.
So I think it's going to be an exciting conversation. So
definitely.
I'm digging this. So so now, is there any? I didn't mention much about your bio. Do you want to tell the audience any more about your background?
Well, I'm an estate planning attorney, but I started out as a litigator. And before that, I was actually in a journalism major in college. And so my trajectory to this work was definitely anything but a straight line. In college, I was on my way to do a public relations internship, and I was rear-ended by a drunk driver, which, in that instant, right, that one moment, I saw how quickly life changed. because I needed to do physical therapy. I couldn't go do these things. And luckily, I landed on my feet, and I ended up working at a civil rights law firm that at the time was doing a police brutality trial. And, this person had become a quadriplegic in police custody. And so I got to work on that, and that really shifted my mentality about how I wanted to show up for my community, how I wanted to advocate for people who weren't necessarily in a position to advocate for themselves. And so I did a lot of that work. I shifted my focus, and here we are today, 12 years later, out of law school anyway, and I'm living that dream of my passion of really advocating for historically and systematically marginalized communities. So I would just add that.
Excellent. I like it. Very good. So now, one of the things that you say is that Black and brown families face a hidden financial emergency. And I think there are many families that are in that situation. I don't think it's necessarily just Black and brown families, but you say Black and brown families in particular. What is that emergency?
Yeah, everybody's facing different financial emergencies, particularly in the United States, while we see sort of a growing economic divide. However, the studies have been done, at least there was a recent study that was done about 2017, that found by 2053, the median net worth for African-American families was set to hit zero if we did nothing. It went on to say that Latinx families or Hispanic families would hit that same result about 2073, right? That study came out. It was a big conversation. But then COVID hit. And in 2020, 1 in 555 African-Americans died as a result of COVID-19, which severely accelerates that timeline. Another thing that was found is that more than 70% of African-Americans have zero estate planning at all. So the African-American community doesn't have any protection or preservation for the wealth that we're accumulating. So while we have more wealth than ever before in the history of this country to actually pass on, we're slated to lose it. In fact, probate court in the United States is costing American families approximately $2 billion annually. And probate court is avoidable with an appropriate and comprehensive estate plan for a family's assets.
Absolutely.
So it is an emergency. I would say that's an emergency, because if we lose it, you just can't get it back.
Very true. That is very true. Now I have a question. This is probably going to sound like ignorant and maybe stupid. But I have a question.
There are no stupid questions.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. I'm an educator secularly, and I understand it as educators. We tell people that, but I have a secret to tell you. That is not true. There are very, 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 very stupid questions. There are very dumb questions all the time. Now,
fair enough.
I don't tell my students that every question is legitimate. Absolutely. But in my head, I'm like, wow, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard. But anyway, anywho. But so biracial people. Mm-hmm. If you're biracial and you're part Black, like, are they? I guess if you read a study,
mm-hmm.
I guess in the details of the study, it will tell you how many of those people are biracial. Is that included in the study? Like when you peel back the onion, or is the assumption always, if you're biracial, that you're considered Black when we're talking about these numbers?
Well, I guess
does that question make sense?
Yeah, but I guess the secondary question would be, right, if we're talking about the economic buying power of the Black community, then obviously that's going to be skewed depending on how you define Black.
Right.
And in this country, at least, and up until recently, we've always held a one-drop rule standard. And so as a country, right, not to say right or wrong or indifferent, we are starting to change that narrative as we start to include other and multiracial and other things. But from a study perspective, oftentimes they're talking about the community as a whole.
Okay.
And so that's what I would that's how I would answer that.
Okay. That's what I would assume as well. Okay. I just wanted to. I was curious. Okay. So that makes sense. All right. So, and you're right. There's oftentimes, but what I seem to find, like you were talking about the estate planning. Now, I'm all in addition to teaching financial literacy and economics. When I teach secularly, I teach financial lit, I teach economics, and I'm also a licensed insurance broker. And I find that I have a heck of a time in our community in particular when it comes to planning ahead for the inevitable with the financial advising aspects and the planning ahead for death and even planning ahead for retirement.
Yeah.
I seem to have a heck of a time in the community to get that point across how important it is.
I think definitely in the older generations, we see that struggle quite a bit.
Yes.
With the younger generations having had more exposure, more access to information, closing that knowledge gap around financial literacy, you see people who are far more receptive to that help and information. When it comes to our older population, though, in the community, it's helpful, at least for me in my practice, to keep in mind what they've been through and where they've been. When we talk about the mortgage crisis of 2008 and the fact that the African-American community lost 50% of its wealth at that time, with the mortgage crisis, and we think about the wealth-building seminars that were held and specifically targeted in our community to, quote-unquote, help educate us and get us into the home buying market, right? But even people who were duly qualified for a regular mortgage were given a subprime mortgage. So when we think about our parents and our grandparents' generation, there's such a lack of trust. And it doesn't come from nowhere, right? It comes from the fact that they have been preyed upon by this industry for generations. And it's hard for them to then say, I'm going to take my money from under the mattress where I know it's safe and give it to you to put into these markets that I don't really understand. So I find that we spend a lot of time on education in our firm. We do webinars, we do, family dinners, and we sit and do a lot of talking to really make sure people feel comfortable about why something exists, how it works, and how it functions. It takes way more time, but it has such a big impact because that lack of financial knowledge, that lack of understanding, and the rightful mistrust that's there, those barriers have to be broken down before we can really even start to talk about the let's plan part. And then we also have to deal with the issue of sort of people believing that if they talk about death, they're going to die. So there is a subsect of that as well.
Oh, dear. Well, you are going to die.
Right. I definitely start there.
I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I didn't think that was like a question.
It comes up far more than you think. Let me tell you. People are like, this makes me really uncomfortable because I feel like I'm just putting bad omens on myself. And I'm like, okay, listen, unless you have found the fountain of youth, and if you have, please tell me because I would like some of that. This is an eventuality. And so we're not preparing for your death in a way of we think you're going to die tomorrow. This is an eventuality that's coming for everyone. It's not about if you're going to die. It's about when.
And quite honestly, we need to, I don't know, you need to be more honest with yourself about, it could be tonight. Right. It could be next year. It could be 10 years. I mean, it just really could. And you just need to really move into a space of acceptance.
It's hard. I don't like thinking about it, right?
I mean, you don't need to
I might not wake up tomorrow.
You don't need to like wallow in it, but you need to okay, this is like a part of life that you need to accept, and you need to make sure your family's going to be okay.
that's the key. That's the key right there, is making sure that the people who are left behind are taken care of. And I think that becomes the point that resonates with people, because we know just enough about estate planning to be dangerous. We've seen something in a movie or on TV, and it says, oh, you need a will, or, these family fightings, and we go, oh, this is enough. This is all we need, because there hasn't been any exposure to what anything else could look like, except for the opposite in the media, which is, these incredibly wealthy trust fund kids that, get portrayed as spoiled brats driving these, fabulously expensive cars and living in these mega mansions. And people immediately go, well, that's not for me. So when we're talking about trust, that's not me. We're over here with the other people talking about a will. And what that does is we immediately psychologically separate ourselves without taking the next step of saying, well, how does that work and why? So absolutely the perception needs to shift. So we're not talking about planning for your death. We're talking about how your family continues to live and thrive off of your hard work and the labor that you put in while you were here.
Exactly. And a GoFundMe, I just wonder, how many GoFundMe posts do we need to see on social media for our honestly, before we go, okay, like you would think when you saw it, when you saw it for Cousin Myrtle a month ago, like that would be your trigger, your red flag to say, you know what, let me take care of this, and then fold the paper up and put it in a drawer or whatever. You know what I mean? And then be done with it until it's needed. Tell whoever you need to tell where your stuff is, and then be done. But we see it, and then we contribute to the GoFundMe for the funeral, and then we don't take care of it.
What I find is that people don't necessarily know what they need to take care of.
True.
Right? So they go, there's this GoFundMe, and I understand maybe they didn't save enough, so I need to save more of my pennies so that my family doesn't have to go through that when I die. So then people save more. I find that people aren't necessarily not planning for their funeral expenses, but that they don't know how to necessarily plan in such a way that their family is cared for. They're putting the money into a savings account to say, oh, I've got a little something stashed aside for when that's time, but then they get sick, and they're sick for 2 years, and they need care, so that money gets eaten up, and then when they pass away, there's nothing left, right, versus having a burial policy or a life insurance policy and stocking that money away into something else that then generates a death benefit that comes back.
Exactly.
And it's little tweaks, right, because people are doing it. It's the little tweaks of how they do it that makes the big impact.
Right. That's exactly right. And there is definitely, the disparity is there. I really struggle with, and maybe it's because I'm not I live in an area that is it's not very diverse. It's a predominantly white area, so I see a lot of poverty, white poverty, black poverty. I see poverty of people of different colors. So, I'm concerned about people who don't have that information, who are white and who are black and who are Spanish or whatever color. Like, I want everybody who doesn't have this information to have this information, because my suspicion is if you have generational poverty and you're white, 2 generations from now, you're still going to have generational poverty. If you're white, you're probably still going to have that situation. You know what I mean? If somebody doesn't,
to an extent,
doesn't step in.
So in our firm, right, to an extent, in our firm, we educate everybody. But there is this state of emergency that's happening in the African-American community, because one of the things that we as black and brown people can't do in this society is assimilate. And we can go that one step further. There are people who are born impoverished in white communities who excel educationally, who maybe get a scholarship to college or acceptance to college, take out loans, much like the experience, right? But they also have the ability to potentially assimilate into the culture, to marry and change their economic status in a way that is not as prevalent in black and brown communities. And that can change the trajectory. But from a numbers perspective, there is a huge disparity between white and black communities and white, black, and Hispanic communities. I mean, there was a study, again, back to 2017, there was a study that was done that said among college-educated black families, only about 13% get an inheritance of $10,000 or more, compared to about 41% of white college graduate families. And the white families were receiving an inheritance on average of more than $150,000 from the previous generation, whereas that figure is less than $40,000 for black families. And the study focused on inheritances of $10,000 or more because they said that it qualifies as transformative assets, meaning they could significantly alter the course of one's life. And they went on to further talk about what that looks like, right?
Right.
If you have $41,000 in an inheritance or $40,000 or less in an inheritance, you're not even really paying off tuition at a state school assuming there's debt.
Right.
We're passing negative wealth.
Right.
And if you're getting $150,000, while that might not seem like a lot to the gajillionaires, right, to the mega billionaires in our society, it's enough to pay off a full undergrad debt balance.
Sure.
It's also enough to put a 20% down payment on a $575,000 home. And that's, again, assuming that there's debt at all for student loans. And that creates the impetus for this growing racial wealth gap. And the emergency really is that we have 10 to 15 years before the road to zero wealth, right? And so we've got to get people educated and informed about proper estate planning so that 70% plus of people in the community, particularly the baby boomer population, has an opportunity to at least protect what they've built.
Amen. Very true. We're talking to Portia Wood of Wood Legal Group. We're talking about estate planning and closing the racial wealth gap. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your host, Melanie Collette. We'll be back in a few minutes.
This is important because it's your money. Your money. Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
And we're back. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. Our guest this hour is Portia Wood. She is a lawyer with Wood Legal Group. She's an estate planning lawyer. And we're talking about the importance of estate planning and closing the racial wealth gap, having a very important conversation about closing the racial wealth gap. I'm enjoying this conversation very much, by the way. I hope you are too.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, so I'm happy to be here.
Oh, very, very good. So I love this. So a lot of people, and I face this all the time when I'm teaching about this stuff, a lot of young people think that they don't make enough money to start planning for their wealth or to start really taking care of their assets. I actually did a presentation for our county chamber of commerce, and after my presentation we were on a panel and we took questions from the audience, and someone asked, one of the questions that we were asked was that I was asked was, as a person who's just starting out with their serious career, what advice do I have? And I said, start planning early, get a financial advisor now.
Absolutely.
Do it
absolutely.
Now. No matter how much money you make, start doing it now. I wish I had started when I was your age. She might have been like 25, 25 years old. So, like, why is it a mistake to think that you're too young or you don't make enough money to start planning and being strategic with your money?
You got to start from the time your child is born, right? Mm-hmm. Financial literacy is something that goes over time. You know, right?
Yep.
Compound interest is your friend.
That's right.
And so in a society where we have a stable economy, and some might argue that right now, but we're fortunate to live in a country that has a stable economy. And what we know about money in stable economies is that they really only need two things to grow, right? Time in the market and protection from outside forces.
Right.
And any money that's invested in a stable economy that's protected from outside forces like divorce and creditors and things of that nature will grow. That's just the basics of how money works in today's society, and so in the United States specifically. So when we think about how and when to get started, it's wherever you are right now, but the younger the better.
Exactly.
When it comes to estate planning, everybody over the age of 18 needs some form of an estate plan. We just don't all need the same estate plan.
Right.
Because it's going to depend on your personal circumstances, right? Who you are, what your family structure is, what your asset levels are, and what your goals are. Because none of us are the same. You might be 18 on your way to college, and you really don't have anything, maybe the car you drive and some clothes in your closet. Well, your basic estate plan is likely going to be your property power of attorney. So a legal document that allows someone to step up and take care of you if you're in a car accident or get COVID-19 and you're in the hospital. Who makes sure your bills are paid? Who gets access to your bank account to do that? Most people don't think about it, but nobody automatically has access to your bank account if you don't give them access, either making them a co-owner or power of attorney on the account or giving them a general power of attorney in the event of incapacity. Absent that, they would have to go to a judge to ask for permission. And that's the same whether you're married or not if you don't have joint accounts. The second thing that 18-year-old is going to need is their health care directives. Who makes your medical decisions in that situation? If you need to have some emergency surgery or you need to be on a ventilator and someone's got to make the decision about whether or not that gets pulled, who does that? There isn't an automatic default for people over the age of 18. Now, those first two things that I mentioned, by the way, have absolutely nothing to do with how much money is in your bank account.
Correct.
And everything to do with the fact that someone is a legal adult in our country.
Exactly.
The third piece, and this is where most people think about estate planning, but it's really just one piece. The third piece is your distribution plan.
Yep.
What happens after you're gone? Who gets it? What is it? How much? And how? For some people, that 18-year-old that really doesn't have anything, it's probably just a will. But let's say that same 18-year-old owns a home. Well, a home is a probatable asset. Their baseline plan is going to be a trust so that they can avoid the court interference of probate. Let's say that same 18-year-old has minor children and a life insurance policy, right? Well, they may not want someone else or the court deciding who manages those minor kids' money. They might want to have a say, and so they may put it into a trust, et cetera, et cetera. And so it depends on who the beneficiaries are, what you have, and what you are trying to achieve. So it's going to be specific to each individual and their families. So we don't all need the same one, but we all need one because it's the foundation to our financial homes.
Exactly. I actually do an exercise with my students about this, and my students think I'm crazy because I have them do a list, and the financial literacy class that I teach is with 17 and 18-year-olds. It's like juniors and seniors usually, and they think I'm crazy. I have them do a list of like their assets and who gets what, who's going to be their power of attorney, et cetera, and they think I'm crazy. Like it's completely impossible that anything could ever possibly happen. And I try to tread lightly because I don't want them to have like anxiety. Right. But it's a conversation that needs to be had. Right? Like
it's one that most people never even think about. It's so often people come into my office and they're like, "Oh, well, my spouse will do it," or "My parents are."
They think their parents are going to do it. I have conversations with them about record keeping. Where's your Social Security card, your passport, your driver's license, like all your important papers? Where do you keep your bank statements? And they're like, my mom has it, and I'm like, okay, well, you're 18. Why does your mom have it? Like, what is going on? What is going on? What is happening?
The thing that's come up recently that's really been helpful in this conversation for me, at least when I'm talking to people, is Britney Spears. Britney Spears' conservatorship. You know, when people talk about, oh, well, that would never happen to me. I'm young. I'm invincible. It's like, well, Britney Spears was young and at the top of her game and had a very public mental breakdown that resulted in a years, in fact, decade-plus long conservatorship.
Yep.
That resulted in a Netflix show, international protests on Free Britney, because she did not have control over her own life. And when I talk to people, I say, you know, life changes in an instant. I know I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I was going to be a publicist. I was on my way to public relations, and someone else's bad choices, someone else's decision to get behind the wheel of a car after drinking altered the course of my life in an instant.
Indeed.
And I had no say. Thankfully, I was able to walk away from that, but I had no say. And if I hadn't had certain things in place to keep me protected, it could have been significantly worse for me. And so we don't know what's coming down the pipe. We are fortunate that each day so far, we've woken up healthy, we've woken up happy, we haven't had that catastrophic event. But it's just a matter of luck, right? Because we do the best that we can. So I think Britney Spears is always such a great example because the average person is not going to get a Netflix special to try to help them get out of their conservatorship. And so the last thing you want is the court of your jurisdiction to be making decisions about who has that much power over your life because they don't know your family. They don't know if your mom or your dad, you know, abuses alcohol or substances or has been estranged from you or any of these things. They have to go with who's presented in front of them in court. And if they make a bad decision or a decision that negatively impacts you and you don't have the power to get out of that, you're stuck. That's a simple solution. We can make those decisions for ourselves with just a little tweak on the foresight.
That is so true, but I think, you know, generationally we've really changed. Like I remember being, you know, when I got my first job, my parents giving me my birth certificate and my Social Security card and saying, "Good luck. I hope, you know, I hope everything works out. You know, go fill out." Never came to a job interview with me. Never didn't do any of that stuff. But now, you know, kids really rely on their parents for everything, and it's very scary to me. And I kind of blame the parents for not letting their kids be more independent, because almost every answer that I get when I'm asking them questions, today we did an exercise about how to read your pay stub. And there were kids that I know for a fact have jobs, and I asked this one kid about his pay stub, and I said, well, you know when you look at your pay stub, and he's like, well, I've never seen my pay stub, and I'm like, how is that possible? Because you have had a job, I know, all year, because we've talked about it. And he's like, my mom keeps them, and I'm like, well, that is not good. Why is that? Why does your mom have it? Like, what's going on? But this is what I'm saying. Like that's not, you know, I have another exercise where they fill out job applications, and I know these kids have jobs, and then I look at the work and I'm like, how is this job application not filled out so terribly wrong? And I'd say to the kid, I know you have a job. How is this so wrong? Oh, my mom filled it out for me. Why? Why did your mom fill it? Like the whole point of getting an entry-level job, part of the point is the experience of filling out the job application. Like that's it, filling it out and failing and figuring out why you failed and then doing better.
And trying again.
Right. That's so.
Oh, I know. I mean, you know, when I was a young person, so I'm third of 4 children in my family, and from the time I hit high school, 9th grade, the summer before 9th grade, I mean, I had a job, right? I have been a gift wrapper at Williams-Sonoma. I have been a barista at Starbucks. I mean, when I was a baby, I sold newspapers in D.C. and Baltimore for the Afro-American newspaper. Like, I have literally had a job my entire life.
Me too, same.
So I don't understand. I honestly don't understand. I have a 4-year-old now, and we sit and we look at his custodial account, and we go, how much money's in there? You have this much money to invest today. Where do you want to do it? It's generally always Marvel is the answer. But, we have those conversations at the breakfast table and at the dinner table because that financial literacy element in our society is typically taught there and historically has been taught there. And in our communities, it didn't exist.
Right. Yes.
What were the 3 things we weren't supposed to talk about?
Money, politics, religion.
Yep, money, politics, religion. And I didn't even have to tell you, right? We did not pre-plan that.
No, not at all. Money, politics, religion. No.
Politics, religion. There were 3 things that we were taught growing up that were impolite to discuss in mixed company.
Right.
You just don't do it. But how do you learn? Because it's the blind leading the blind. And if someone didn't have the information to teach you about money and they taught you, you just take what's given to you, you don't make a fuss, you sock a little bit away. My grandmother used to always say, you got to have your walking papers. You don't ever want to be in a bad marriage or relationship and unable to leave.
I was just having this conversation with someone before I got on the air, before I got to the studio, literally having the conversation about the generation of women before us that taught women in this generation that very thing.
Mm-hmm. But that's how financial literacy has historically been taught.
Yeah.
And in the age of the internet, these ideas and concepts have reached far and wide. They're no longer just dinner table conversations, which is why I think we've seen such a shift in these younger generations, because we have more access. When I think back, and if you can indulge me for just a moment, I think back, my great-great-great-grandfather was born a slave in Montgomery County, Maryland, on a plantation owned by his biological father. So he was enslaved by his biological father, which is not, as you know, uncommon.
Right.
When the biological father died, my great-great-grandfather, his wife, and children were passed through an estate plan to his biological aunts. And so we used to be the wealth that was passed in other people's estate plans. It's not something that we don't do because we're lazy or we don't want to or we don't want to talk about death. We literally have never known what it is, except for the rare few who get the opportunity to get this information. He subsequently bought his own freedom from his aunts, and then the freedom of his wife and his 4 kids, and then the land, the 660 acres of land that they tilled as enslaved people. When he died, he created a rudimentary estate plan from what he had seen. Just from that little bit of knowledge, was able to do something that restricted the sale of that land. He wrote down, if you want to sell this, you can only sell it to your siblings. If you want to sell your parcel, you can only offer it to your siblings. That's huge.
That was an estate plan. So
that was an estate plan, and it preserved it. I mean, the land is now parkland, but that didn't happen until the 70s. That land stayed in our family for hundreds of years, but also, and this is really the point that I was getting to, my great-great-grandmother sold her parcel to her brother, took that money and, gave portion of it to her husband, who then founded the Afro-American newspaper, which, again, is the longest continuously running black newspaper, family-owned black newspaper in the country at 130 years.
Wow.
But that land transfer, right, that preservation of that land and that land transfer consolidated that wealth at that time and allowed for the purchase of a business that still continues to this day. And so when we start to make the minor tweaks, even that rudimentary of an estate plan, at that time had the ability to create ripples across generations.
Right.
And so when I say that how important it is to do these little tweaks, it can have huge impacts on our families for 6 and 7 generations beyond. I mean, I'm still a beneficiary of that one decision.
For sure, and your children will be too. Before we go, I want to ask you one thing that you wish every family would take action on today to protect their family's wealth.
I would say the first thing I want people to do, the one thing, get educated.
Yes.
We have a free resource library on our website, woodlegalgroup.com/access resource library. It is free. It talks about what wills are, what trusts are, family limited partnerships, life insurance. The studies that I've quoted are also there for people who want to go and read them themselves. The articles, I mean, you've got to start with a baseline knowledge of understanding of how the system works.
Yes.
What are these tools? So the first thing I would say is get educated. And the next, take action. Because knowledge without action, it really means nothing.
Amen. You're right about that. Where can people follow you on any social media, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so we are Wood Legal Group on Instagram, Facebook, Black Trust Fund Kids on TikTok, as well as on Clubhouse. We have a club there as well. But the best place is really on our website, woodlegalgroup.com. We do educational webinars twice a month, one specifically with families who have minor children, because, again, those estate planning considerations are very different.
Yes.
And then another one that is just wills, trust, and generational wealth planning.
Excellent. Well, Portia, you've been very informative. I've so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on Money Talk with Melanie.
Oh, my gosh, Melanie, thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. So thank you, and for all the work that you do.
Thank you. And this will be posted as a podcast in the next day or two, and I'll be sure to send you that link.
Excellent. Sounds good. You have a great day. Nice talking to you.
Thank you. You too. Have a great night. We'll be back on the other side of the break.
Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. If you missed our first hour, you missed a lot of very valuable information from Portia Wood of the Wood Legal Group. She is an estate planning lawyer. We talked about the importance of estate planning, and we also talked about how estate planning can help close the racial wealth gap. I'm always kind of leery of anything. I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist and that there aren't still some residual consequences of racism, but what I will say is I think that there's a lot of political there's a lot to gain by keeping us divided through racism. So I'm very leery of people using racism to divide us and to keep us apart. So I'm very leery of people saying, well, this is due to systematic racism, or that is due to systematic racism. But having said that, Ms. Wood really did bring some very good information about things that have happened, some very good statistics, and not only that, some very good information for everyone that may not be planning properly for the inevitable. Let's just be honest. And one of the important things that she brought out is that really when your child is born, you need to start planning. You need to start planning. And if you didn't start planning then, if you haven't started planning yet for the inevitable, the time to start planning is today. Because if there are only two things that are certain, and that is death and taxes. So you need to, and even if you don't die, another thing that she talked about is what if you're incapacitated? What if you're in the hospital for a month with COVID? Somebody's got to pay your bills. You need to have that laid out as far as who is going to take care of that. That defaults to a judge or whatever. So she just really had some very good information as far as how to really be proactive in handling your finances. And that is all a part of, it comes under the estate planning umbrella, and really just did a good job helping the audience to appreciate how planning properly for the eventuality of death can have a ripple effect on generations to come. So if you missed that, the Money Talk with Melanie podcast version will be posted on the 98.7 The Coast website in the next day or two, and on my social media at Money Talk Mel on Twitter or at Money Talk with Melanie on Facebook. In the next day or two, you'll be able to get a recording of that first hour and of the next hour coming up, where we will switch gears and talk to Dana Golden, who is a principal at the Life Recovery Coach, and we're going to talk to her about the stigma of addiction in the workplace, people who have drug addictions, and the stigma of being a drug addict in the workplace. Not somebody who's doing drugs in the workplace, but just somebody who has a drug addiction and has a job, and they're a known drug addict. I didn't even know that was a thing. I have to be honest. So it should be a really interesting conversation. It's something that apparently people are grappling with. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, and something that we're going to have a chat with her about. In the meantime, before we bring Dana Golden on, I thought I would have a chat with you all about an article that I ran into today, something I struggle with. The Today Show had an article about 7 ways to spend less on food when you're trying to eat healthy. Well. I'm actually trying not to eat at all. So here's the thing. Is there any better diet than seeing yourself in pictures? I was a keynote speaker last Saturday, up the road for an annual meeting. I talked about women in politics and why there should be more women at the table because we're awesome. Quiet as it's kept. I know that people don't want to hear this, but men and women are different. And women bring a lot to the table when it comes to politics, and so I was a keynote speaker to drive home that point. And we had a photographer at that event, and then the pictures came out on social media. And for some bizarre reason, I know better than this, but for some weird reason, I decided it'd be an awesome idea to wear a dress with stripes going across, which I never ever do. Ever since I've been picking my own clothes, I've never picked stripes that go across because it's not a good idea for someone who's built like myself. I just don't do that. But I did, and it was a mistake. So consequently, I'm not eating anymore. I don't think I'm eating ever again. But for those of you who are eating, here's 7 ways. Here's 7 ways to spend less on food in this inflation economy. For those of you who are eating, John is looking at me drink. He's like, "Oh, that's why you have water instead of ice cream today, because usually I'm behind the mic with ice cream. Today I have water." He's like, "Oh, so that's what's up with the water, Mel, huh?" Yes, that's what's up with the water. And every time I think about eating, I just think about that picture with the stripes going across, and decide that is not a good idea. So, but here's 7 ways to spend less. If you are like me, and you're trying to eat more healthy. I know everybody knows this. Plan ahead. Everybody says plan ahead. Isn't there a way to eat healthy without planning ahead? Apparently not, because that was number 1 on the list. Plan ahead. Everybody knows that you have to plan ahead. My problem with planning ahead is that I never want to eat what I plan to eat, and then it ends up going bad. You got to meal prep. You prep all the, you go in on Sunday and you chop everything up and you put everything in a container. And then on Monday, I'm looking at this container of food and I'm like, I don't want this. But anyway, that's what you're supposed to do. That's number 1. Plan ahead. I'm not being very encouraging. I didn't say I was going to be encouraging. I said I was going to tell you what was on the list. Make a list. Make a grocery list. This can help your budget. And obviously, you're going to have to stick to the list. I also find that if you shop online, it's easier. Like if you shop online instead of going to the store, that does make sticking to the list a lot easier. If you Uber Eats or DoorDash instead, like if you're doing that, if you make a list, you can avoid the Uber Eats and the Door Dashing, which I blame COVID for my DoorDash habits, because I was not a Door Dasher before COVID. I really wasn't, because I used to think that DoorDash was really too expensive. I really did. But then when I got COVID and I was like, I didn't really have a choice because I lived by myself and there was nobody to like go get me food. I just DoorDashed everything when I had COVID. I was like on lockdown for 10 days. But apparently grown-ups who are trying to eat healthy should make a list. And like actually put food in their fridge and in the pantry. Oh, is that what that thing up top is? The next thing on the list is use your freezer. So that thing up top or on the side where the ice is your freezer, and you're supposed to use that. So yeah, according to a study in the British Food Journal, shoppers are nearly 6 times more likely to waste fresh food than frozen food. I can attest to that. I would say I'm 10 times more likely to waste fresh food than frozen food. So use your freezer. That's a good idea. Limit food waste, because when you waste food, you waste money. We know that. I can attest to that for sure. And there are a few ways. So let's do that. Create a system. I tell you, stock up on pantry staples when they're on sale. That's a good idea. Ew, plant-based milks. Ugh, that's disgusting. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, that's a great idea. I'm trying to be encouraging here. So use plant-based milks. Those must be the milks that are on the regular shelves instead of in the cold areas. Every time I see those milks, I'm like, what is this? And why is it warm? Yuck. But apparently I guess that's healthier. Okay. Eat more meatless meals. I am so not down with any of these suggestions. I just want to be clear about this, which would explain why I look the way I do on social media in that dress. And I just want to I don't know who invented the podium. Like, I don't know who that person is, but I just want to give a shout out to the inventor of the podium, because it hid like all of my sins, starting with that dress. Buy more brands, except when it comes to the following foods: plant-based milk, yogurt, snack bars. Wow. Okay. You pay extra for branded lower sugar yogurt. So you should go with like no frills. Not down with that either. Just saying. So those are the 7. Like, what? You get to a certain place in life so that you literally don't have to buy no frills anymore. Like, what are they even talking about here? What? Am I in undergrad now where I'm buying? No, like, what? I don't understand what they're talking about. Today's show, this article is beat. But I'm sure listen, one thing about this article, I think that these suggestions would actually work, which is what is problematic about dieting and fitness to begin with. Everything stinks. Have you ever noticed that every diet suggestion, every time I ask for suggestions in a diet, one of the first things they say is, well, all you have to do is not drink. What? Like, what? Somebody said the other day, well, all you have to do is cut out bread, sugar, and alcohol. And my reply to the post was, and also my will to live? Like, what kind of suggestions are these? But anyway, if you want to spend less and eat healthy, those are your 7 suggestions. I kind of think I'd rather be fat. But anyway, I have to really consider that. I'm gonna meditate on that over the next commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Dana Golden of Life Recovery Coach, and we're going to talk about the stigma of addiction in the workplace. We'll be back on the other side of the break.
Money Talk with Melanie features entrepreneurs, CEOs, and politicos who are experts in their fields. Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your host, Melanie Collette, and our guest for the second hour is Dana Golden. She is with the recovery coach, and she's going to talk to us this evening about the stigma of addiction in the workplace. Now, normally, very interestingly, she appears with her ex-husband, David Marion. She's going to tell us the story behind that. But unfortunately, David is not able to be with us this evening. Together, they bring their 30 years of expertise in addiction and recovery with a simple mission in mind, and that is to bring solutions to not only those suffering from substance use disorder, but also their families, friends, and coworkers. So without further ado, I welcome Dana Golden.
Thank you so much, Melanie. It's so great to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said, what would you like to know first?
Well, how did you all end up working together?
Okay, so, I'm going to make a very long story short. We were married. David was a recovering addict when I met him. And when we were married, he relapsed when he had knee surgeries and was given pain pills, opioids, for his recovery. And he immediately got addicted to those and just went right from 0 to 100 because, as an addict knows, it's a progressive disease. And once you stop and start again, you kind of pick up where you left off. So it progressed very rapidly. It turned to heroin. I ended up taking our 2 daughters and divorcing him just to keep us safe and protected. And within 6 years, he bankrupted his company, got into financial troubles because of a gambling addiction, and he ended up in prison with a 5-year sentence for money laundering, just white-collar stuff. So when he was in prison, I told him, we have to write a book because we can help other families. He got clean and sober before he went into prison, not wanting to go through that in prison. And the relapse story and his getting sober in the first place story, and then me navigating with kids through a household with addiction. I just knew that we could help other people. So we wrote a book together called Addiction Rescue, the No BS Guide to Recovery, and then we started the Life Recovery Coach as our business. And David is an interventionist, which is why he can't be here tonight, because he ended up being an intervention for the last 2 days. And actually, while we're talking, he's just traveling with his client to treatment because the intervention was successful, and he's dropping him off at treatment tonight from Sacramento to Houston. They're flying. So that's why he's not with us, but interventions don't wait. When people are concerned about their loved ones, it can be a fatality, and you move fast. So that's why he's not with us. But in the meantime, I'm a family addiction coach and a recovery coach. David is also a recovery coach, and we work with the families that are dealing with substance use disorder, either in themselves or a loved one, also in the workplace, amongst friends, etc.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so I have questions.
Of course.
And I think you probably anticipated that.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I think that there is a debate, like just in society in general, about whether or not substance use disorder is even a thing. Can you explain that? Like, can you explain why
Absolutely.
it's a disorder?
Yes. Because what happens is the brain actually changes. So it doesn't matter what the addiction. So it can be alcohol or drugs. It can also be a process addiction, such as gambling, porn, sex, shopping, gaming. You hear workaholics, workout addicts. Okay, so it doesn't matter. And obviously, some aren't bad to have, right? Like, it's not bad to have an addiction to working out or eating healthy. We don't deal in those areas. But where you're experiencing severe consequences, that's when we get involved, financial, health, etc. But all of addiction works the same way in the brain, and it changes the neural pathways. And what happens is the dopamine and serotonin and GABA that your body would normally make gets stifled because of the substances you're using that are now producing the the GABA and the dopamine and the serotonin. So your body can't produce it on its own, and that's where it gets stuck. And so it's a vicious cycle because you need more and more to keep up those levels. And when you stop, those levels slow down and go into depression and anxiety, and you don't feel well. And so there's a need to have more. And that's why I said before it's a progressive disease, because the brain, as those neural pathways get deeper and deeper, you need more and more to have the same effects as it did initially. So it is a disorder, and it does change the brain. And the beauty of it is that the brain has neuroplasticity, and it can repair itself. So in time, the brain can come back to levels of normal on its own, but it doesn't take 30 days in treatment. I mean, it takes 12 to 14 months for the brain to heal itself. So we say, a treatment and getting out of your environment is just start, but it's a practice, just like you would practice yoga or you would practice journaling, or you have a practice. It is a practice every day to keep your body, mind, and spirit healthy and away from substances.
Okay, so is it a situation where either you are prone to that disorder or you're not? How does it work? I've had, for example, if you have dental surgery and you get an opioid, if you have substance use disorder, will you definitely get addicted to that opioid? And if you don't, you won't?
Well, okay, so let's go back to your original question of their predisposition. And in some people there are, because it can be hereditary. 50% of people come by it naturally. They're just predispositioned for it. And 50% of addicts is environmental. So they experience some kind of trauma, home life, their environment. They were susceptible because of what was going on around them. So it can be environmental. It can be hereditary. So I would say if there's an addiction problem in the family, your grandfather has an alcoholic, or you might have that predisposition. So if you get a prescription of opioids, you might be very mindful that you might get addicted and not take more than you're supposed to. And that's the thing with an addict. They can't stop at normal levels. Right? It's like a thirst faucet that they can't turn off. And that's the difference, because I can have a cocktail and I can go out with girlfriends and I can go home and be fine. I know people that they have to finish every last drink that's on the table. They can't go home until the bar is closing. I mean, those are signs that it's a problem. Does that help?
Okay. Yes. Now, because I know, social media, always talks about just different, because I think part of the reason, we're talking about stigma in the workplace, but I think that part of the reason there's a stigma is that there's a feeling that I think that people have underlying feelings about drug use in general. Yeah. You know what I mean? Why are you doing drugs in the first place?
Yeah, right. It's the wino on the street with a paper bag with a bottle in it, or it's the guy on the park bench, that's zoned out because he's a meth head or whatever. I mean, those are what we think about when we think of addicts and alcoholics. But that's not the case. I mean, it is a equal opportunity destroyer. There is not one walk of life that it doesn't affect, from, kids to, we work with people in their 70s that were bored at home and they just started drinking a bunch, and now their spouse is like, can you get my wife into treatment? I mean, we work with every area of life, and it touches every other person now, between all the addictions out there, and the pandemic was horrific. The carnage and fallout of, we had over 100,000 deaths due to substance use in 2021, 95,000 deaths of alcohol use disorder. And those are just numbers that are astronomical. We've never hit those numbers before. So the pandemic's been awful for the isolation, the loneliness, the sheltering in place, the mental illness, and all of it just was really hard. And people, 70% of working Americans have some kind of a use disorder. And
70? Did you say 70%?
70% of them, yes. 7% of Americans have some kind of a use disorder. And I'm not just talking about drugs and alcohol. I'm talking about all the process addictions there are as well. And yeah, I've heard, too, to be human is to be addicted to something, right? I mean, people have their ice cream, people have their coffee, people have their cigarettes. I mean, the gamut is really wide. Obviously, we're talking more about the ones causing severe consequences in people's lives. But there was a study that 9 out of 10 people that took the survey admitted to drinking during work hours while working at home. And 45 they walked out early.
Okay, but wait a minute. That doesn't mean you have an addiction. You just do that because you can.
No, it does not. It absolutely does not. And I didn't mean to say that. I'm just saying people are getting away with whatever they can because it's a place to go, especially during the pandemic. A lot of our answers are in a drink sometimes. So it's just really prevalent. I'm not talking about just addiction. It's just prevalent. Gray area drinking is a huge thing now where people are questioning their relationship with alcohol. They're not suffering severe consequences, but they're drinking more. They're drinking the bottle instead of a glass because they don't have to drive home. One cocktail turns to 2 and 3. And so their, anxiety is now a scientific diagnosis that, between a hangover and anxiety, did I drink too much? What did I say? Did I get in a fight? People are really questioning, like, is this a problem for me? And that's why things like dry January and sober October, people are kind of trying on life without alcohol to see how it impacts them and how they feel.
Yeah, so I can't. I wouldn't know about that. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. Well, I'm not because I literally would never do that. But I'm just kidding.
No, most of us wouldn't, Melanie. Yeah.
Because as my audience knows, in my other life, I'm a high school teacher.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, alcohol is kind of a necessary. Yeah, I need that.
Got you.
But yeah, I was presenting at a county chamber of commerce event, and it was a women in business forum, and one of the other presenters, we were talking about how different aspects of COVID, right? And I was the business owners aspect, and another woman was doing how our health was affected. And one of the things that she covered was alcohol. And she said, she gave an example of like what was considered too much. And I'll be darned if that woman did not say like 1 glass of wine a day. And everybody fell out laughing, like the whole room, the entire room, which was full of women, like business women and women, career women. The whole room just roared. And she was like, she was like, I know.
Yeah. But you know what that is? I mean, that's the CDC guidelines for moderate drinking is 1 glass of wine, whatever, cocktail for women, and 2 for men per day. That's what the guidelines say moderate drinking is.
Who made up that guideline? Like the National Society for I Don't Drink? Who made up that guideline?
I agree, and I think it kind of could be changed too. Used to be alcohol was really, really strong. It came from moonshiners, so maybe that's when they made that rule and they didn't change it. So like now drinks are what 6% alcohol, not 90 proof.
Right, because we all she laughed too, and she was like, I know, really?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Melanie. But that is what the guidelines say. I will say that she is absolutely correct about that.
Right, that is what she said. So, okay. So, all right. So, it's substance. So, because I wonder, I'm trying to figure out because whenever this subject is mentioned, like on social media, you have the people who are in the camp, and I've asked some of my students this. With all the information that we have, like why as a young person would you ever smoke a cigarette, smoke a joint, try any kind of drug whatsoever? Like why would you? It's so dangerous. And like with all the news and stuff with what we know about fentanyl and pills being laced and just how super dangerous it is. Like, why would you, like, I went to college in the 80s, and I was petrified to try marijuana, because back then was the crack epidemic, right? And how drug dealers were getting people crack addicted back then was they were lacing marijuana with crack. Like, that was like a known thing. So, me, because I'm a type of person that always thinks worst case scenarios, I was like, the first time I try weed, it'll be laced with crack. And instead of getting my degree, I'll end up like a crackhead in an alleyway and be dead. So, like, I never smoked anything, like, ever. And whenever, if I was at a party and somebody broke out the drugs, I was like, I'm out. Later. Bye.
Right.
So, and the kids, kids can never really give me a good answer for why they try drugs. I can never get a reasonable, like, why would you do that? Just leave. Just go.
Yeah, it's peer pressure. It's boredom. I just watched a documentary recently called Dead on Arrival about the fentanyl problem that we're having. 175 people are dying a day from fentanyl right now. And it's laced in marijuana, it's laced in opioids, it's laced in cocaine, it's in everything. You're right, it's playing Russian roulette every time those kids go out and buy something, and even marijuana, and they're dead from smoking a joint. It is the saddest thing. I mean, I don't know why drug dealers are killing off their clientele.
That does not make any sense to me either. I think it's the weirdest thing.
The weirdest thing. Yeah, and so you're absolutely right. We have got to have these conversations with kids. It needs to be more prevalent, more prevention, more awareness, because it is not worth it anymore. You didn't die from cocaine if it was in your marijuana. You die from fentanyl if it's in your marijuana. And so it's life or death with what's going on out there today. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's nuts. So there are people, and this never occurred to me, that are in the workplace that are struggling with drug addictions, and they're suffering from a social stigma because they have problems with addiction?
Well, it's twofold, because people struggling with addiction are in the workplace, and people that have a loved one at home are struggling in the workplace. And I say it causes a lack of productivity and morale, because addiction is all-consuming. I mean, if you're in active addiction, your mind cannot be present. You are thinking about your next fix, your next high, whatever it is. You are not present. If your loved one is at home and you're worried about them going out and buying drugs on the street and dying, you're all consumed with, is my loved one a statistic today? Am I going to get that phone call? So it's really hard to be present when you're struggling with addiction on either side of it, right? And it's so hard to talk about because, like we said, there's still that stigma attached to drugs and alcohol that make it really uncomfortable to talk about. And so people are silently struggling. And this goes on in all of our workplaces. The guys at the top, and I'm telling you, we work with, famous musicians, CEOs of company, high executives, struggling with this, and they've got a lot of reason to hide this, right? Not be found out. And they have the resources to hide it and not be found out, whether it's money to fuel their addiction or, they're at the top of the ladder so they don't have to be at work. So they just, from every position in every scenario of employment, there are people struggling. And it's $81 billion lost every year in productivity for employers because of addictions. And the biggest segment of that is people that are hungover or just don't show up to work.
Wow. You know what? We're up against a break. But we will definitely pick it back up when we come back. We're talking to Dana Golden about the stigma of drug addiction in the workplace. We'll be right back.
Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie. Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on 98.7 The Coast.
And we're back. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm speaking with Dana Golden of the Life recovery coach. We're speaking to her about the stigma of addiction in the workplace. Very interesting conversation. And before we went to break, you were talking about how not only does the person who has substance use disorder deal with a stigma, but also loved ones of the person who is addicted deals with a stigma as well, and deals with worry because they're also not present. And the person who has the addiction isn't present because they are worried about their next fix. The loved one of the person who has the addiction can't be present either because they're concerned that they're out looking for their next fix. That's a lot.
It is. It's a lot, and it's a heavy subject. And I'll tell you, the worst is when it's parents dealing with a kid, because you brought this kid into the world, and now you feel responsible, right? If it's a spouse, if it's a sister or a brother, it's really quite different. But when you're at work and you know that your kid's out there on the streets and using and has an addiction problem, you cannot be present. It is so worrisome and all-consuming. And that's why we find it so important to work with the families, because there is a lot of help. There's a lot of education for addicts, right? We have treatment for them. We have programs and AA, and we have therapists that deal with addiction. And the families are kind of left in the way. Like, what about me? And so we make it a big priority of ours to get the resources to the families as well to help them.
Yeah, I would imagine that the worry has to be overwhelming.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, I have two nephews, and they don't have drug problems, but I just worry about them just being young and the drugs just being out there. Like, I just worry about them just being young and there being drugs available.
Exactly.
And just making one bad decision just because they're young.
Yep.
Know?
You're absolutely right. One bad decision, and it's death now. It's not like you end up puking. I mean, it's ending in fatalities with this fentanyl crisis.
Right, exactly. Or any of my students, because they're high schoolers and they're having fun.
And let's be realistic. I mean, that's what kids do. I mean, you experiment. You're in high school, you go off to college, and you experiment. And I did it. You didn't do it because you were afraid. I did it. It was all my friends were doing, but it wasn't. It didn't lead to death. And in my case, fortunately, I don't have that addictive nature, that personality. That addictive personality, as they call it. So I grew out of it. I didn't want to do it anymore. I was over it, but. Kids can't take that chance anymore. It's not something you can just play with or experiment or like, I want to try this. It's a phase. A phase can be fatal now.
No, yeah, I was terrified, scared of everything, scared of my own shadow. So I didn't do anything, did nothing.
Yeah.
But I would, and I didn't even think about the productivity that you must lose when you can't concentrate. And you talked about the gray area drinking.
Yeah.
That the pandemic has brought to the forefront.
Exactly.
I mean, you can't drink at work. I mean, but I think, this week is Teacher Appreciation Week. And, every year I submit my proposal for a margarita machine in the faculty room. It gets denied. I feel like if the union really appreciated teachers, a margarita machine in the faculty room is pretty reasonable, but no.
It's the kids. It's not the teachers that prohibit that.
Yeah, apparently parents frown on that, but...
Yeah.
So.
Well, I want to just throw out a shout-out to you on Teacher Appreciation Week for doing what you do.
Oh, well, thank you. But, yeah... Day drinking during the pandemic was a thing. Now, I didn't even do it when we were on lockdown because you just shouldn't. You just shouldn't do that.
Well, Melanie, you're a good girl. There's a lot of people that don't think the way you do, or even if they know they shouldn't be doing it, they're like, you know what? I'm not at work. There's nobody here with me. I can get on a Zoom and nobody will know I had a cocktail.
I'm a rule follower, and I feel
Yeah.
like, first of all, one of the reasons why I talk a lot, I talk a lot, and my mouth is already way out of control. I do not need a glass of wine in order to, while I'm teaching. I really don't. That is not something that would be a good idea.
Right. So do you know teachers that were teaching by Zoom that were having a cocktail during the day?
Not personally, but
Okay. I'm sure there were.
To hear, according to social media, because apparently those fools were taping themselves. Like, why? Okay, you clearly were having a good time while you were on lockdown teaching, but why did you tape it? Like, I don't understand. Why would you do that?
Right. Yeah, why are you going to have evidence of that?
Right.
Yeah,
I don't understand why you would do that. And then in front of your kids, what are you doing?
Right.
No, but and that, friends, is why you don't drink while you're working, while you're being videotaped in front of your children. What?
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's insane.
That's going a little wacky.
So, but that's a gray area. Now, maybe if I worked by myself from home, maybe. Different situation, maybe.
I still don't think you would, because it'd be breaking a rule.
I might not, because I am a rule follower. I'm very weird that way.
But 9 out of 10 people broke that rule.
Because I feel like I'm going to get caught. Like I am the one who would get caught. Like I'm convinced.
Well, whatever you think about comes about. So,
there you go.
I'm sure you would at this point. That's all you've thought about all your life.
Exactly. I'm definitely going to jail. So.
Oh, my God. You're so funny.
Exactly. So, but no, I hadn't thought about it absolutely killing productivity. So,
right.
How do you know when it's time, if you have a relative or a spouse who is maybe drinking a little bit too much or maybe smoking, because it seems like everybody, like here in New Jersey, I don't know if they decriminalized it or I think they legalized recreational marijuana.
It is legal there. Okay, I didn't know.
It is. So, how do you know when somebody's like smoking too much weed or drinking too much wine? How do you know when it's time to say to pull their coattail and say you're doing too much?
Yeah. So when they start suffering consequences, right? Like if you can't get out of bed to go to work, if it's becoming a daily habit and you're losing productivity, if you're, there's signs like you don't change your clothes as much, your hygiene starts lacking, your friends change, and if everybody's telling you and seeing that there's a big change and difference, there's probably something you should look at. If David was here, he'd say it's kind of like walking around with your fly down and everybody knows it except you. So we say if everybody's telling you there's a problem, there might be a problem. If you're starting to suffer some consequences, you might want to take a look at that. If you're experiencing anxiety, right, that combination of anxiety and a hangover, and you can't, you're wasting a whole day on the weekend recovering from your night out, those are signs. We say it's an addiction when you're suffering consequences, and it's never too early to intervene. And unfortunately, people try to intervene, and it's too late. Sometimes we've booked interventions, and the person was dead before we could get to them.
Oh my word!
So, yeah, it's horrible. It's never too late to start having those conversations and to start questioning. And are you doing more and more? And are you losing productivity because you are? And it's something to take a look at and listen to the people around you.
Now, what kind of conversations can you have with kids? Like, is there, because kids, teenagers, really, they don't even need us as teachers because, by the time they get to high school, they know everything. It's really, which makes my job super easy. So is there a convincing conversation that you can have with kids about drugs, one that actually works?
It's really transparency, and it's really communicating. And a long time ago, I heard Dr. Phil say, if you're not talking to your kids about sex at age 9, it's too late, right?
Amen.
right?
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Some of these parents are so blind.
Yeah, it's part of human nature. And, the sooner you can get kids on board with what to expect and what's going to happen and where you're going to be confronted with. And my point is it's the same with drugs and alcohol, because they are going to get confronted with it, and it is going to be around, and you can't just pretend like it's not going to happen and it's not going to be there, because it is. And you have to talk to kids about it. You have to explain use, misuse, abuse, the different stages and what happens and how your brain changes. And, there's an education that all parents should have in talking to their kids about it, so they can really understand what they're doing to themselves, body, mind, and spirit, if they go down that path.
But do the parents have to have an education about what's going on themselves?
Well, they need to understand. I do think so. I think they need to understand. Just say no is not the answer. How many times we say no to our kids, but it doesn't help if you don't explain why. They're going to go behind your back and try it, right? Because there's no explanation. But they really need to explain to children the risk factors that are involved. They have to understand their safety factors too, right? They should have mentors they can talk to, whether if they're not comfortable talking to their parents. Are they part of a team? Can they go to a coach? Can they go to a teacher? Are they part of a church? Can they go to the clergy? They have to have a safe place where they can go if they're confronted with it, or if a friend is using, or they know somebody's hurting themselves with drugs or alcohol. And explain the risk factors, explain the safety factors. These are the kind of conversations we have to have with kids, and they just have to know how dangerous it is.
Right.
In this day and age.
Right, and that's the thing. In this day and age, they have to know what is currently going on, and and I think the thing is, the problem is that it's everywhere.
Everywhere.
That's what worries me about the kids, the teenagers, and the drugs, particularly marijuana. And with the laws changing, I feel like our politicians are kind of saying that it's okay, that it's safe.
Well, it is.
And it isn't.
Go to a dispensary.
Pardon me?
It is safe if you go to a dispensary and get it legally.
Right. Well, relatively safe, but how productive are you going to be?
Again, there's people that can use, drink, smoke weed, whatever, and it's not causing them consequences. If it is, and you're losing productivity, then it's a problem. And, I was just thinking about this. So I raised my daughters graduated in 2014 and 2016 from high school, right? So not even 10 years ago. And I had a completely different conversation with them just 8 years ago than I would have today. Because obviously I talk to my kids about drugs and alcohol, but it would be, and I was like, you're going to try it, I know that it's going to happen, and this is what you need to be aware of, and this is how you can do it safely. Today it's like, there is no way. You could die. I mean, just that short time, it's a whole different ballgame. I just realized that.
Right. Now, can you, so now there are people, it seems, or at least that's from what I've observed, that can function, can work and play and do whatever, that are high as a kite.
I agreed. I know people like that as well.
Right, that are perfectly fine and can
more
work.
Productive.
Pardon me, say that again?
They're even more productive.
Right, and they're out living their best lives and they're high as a kite.
Right. Not a problem. Look at Snoop Dogg. Look at Willie Nelson. I mean, those guys are the epitome of stoners.
Right.
They're doing great. It's causing them consequences. That's their creative mind. They're, you know what I mean? That's how they roll. That's a different scenario. It's when you're losing productivity. It's when it's causing problems in your life. It's when it's, financially, it's causing problems in your relationship. It's, that's when it's a problem.
Yeah. So I think, it's just really difficult to parse that out, or for a young person to parse out how to navigate that.
You're right. You're right. It is hard. Everybody has to understand their limits. They have to understand their heritage, the people they come from. I actually talked to a guy today. He happened to work at my gym. I just had a conversation with him today. Just moved here from Colorado. He was a recovery caseworker. He had a great-grandfather that was an alcoholic, and then he had a father that was an alcoholic, and he knew from the get-go, from a very young age, he had an awareness, he should never drink or do a drug because he would give that same personality would get hooked. And he never has, and he became a recovery caseworker. So, I mean, when you're mindful like that, like, hey, there's a problem in my family, and I can see that when I like things, I get a little carried away, that's something I'm going to stay away from. Right? I mean, it takes awareness, and it takes conversation, it takes transparency, and you got to understand what you're up against.
That's exactly right. Where can people find you and your ex-husband and more information about recovery and how to recover from the stigma, and any information that they can find about where to get help?
Okay, so our website is theliferecoverycoach.com, and you can book in a call there. If you want to email, it's info@theliferecoverycoach.com. We talk to people in all walks of life and any stage of questioning about a loved one, about themselves. We'll, we do consultations all day long. Love to have a conversation with anybody that has any questions. Our book is Addiction Rescue, the No BS Guide to Recovery. You can get it wherever books are sold online, Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And that's how you can find us. And we just want to give solutions. And the more people can start talking about it and erasing this stigma and know it's just a part of our society, and 1 in 8 people are struggling with a substance use disorder, and that means their family members, it's even, 1 out of every 2 or 3, the people that it touches, it's time to start putting it out there that this is real and this is happening, and let's all work together community-wise, collectively, and make a difference.
That's exactly right. Thank you so much, Dana Golden. We appreciate all your information and all of your help. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's great talking to you, Melanie. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Have a good night.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
And we're back. I want to thank Portia Wood from Wood Legal Group, LLC. She talked to us this evening about estate planning and closing the racial wealth gap. Very good job she did this evening. I'd also like to thank Dana Golden from the Life Recovery Coach. She talked to us about the stigma of addiction in the workplace. Another great guest. Did a very good job talking to us about that. And please do join us on Money Talk with Melanie next week, where I will have as a guest Chris Vanderzijden, and he's going to talk to us about how to master your exit plan, how to sell your business and preserve your legacy. And then we'll also speak with Chris Shaver, the couples whisperer. He'll speak to us about money, trust, and financial infidelity. And I want you all to remember that all of this is important because, after all, it's your money. Have a great night.